Halfway through dinner, my boyfriend, Daniel Carter, switched to Spanish again with his childhood friend, Rachel Moore. Daniel placed a piece of grilled cod on Rachel's plate and leaned slightly toward her, as if the two of them were sharing nothing more private than a comment about the weather. "Don't worry," he said in Spanish. "Elena can't understand us. She probably has to guess what the Spanish words on the menu mean." My hand stopped with the fork halfway to my mouth. Daniel noticed me looking up. He immediately switched back to English and smiled with the gentle expression that had fooled me for 5 years. "What's wrong, babe? You don't like the restaurant?" I didn't answer. I looked at the table instead. Seafood paella, garlic shrimp, roasted peppers, warm almond pudding. Everything Rachel liked. Daniel remembered that she shouldn't drink ice water. He remembered her mild shellfish allergy. He even remembered that she liked lemons squeezed beside the fish instead of directly over it. After 5 years together, he still forgot that I hated cilantro. Rachel stirred her soup and asked in Spanish, "Are you sure she can't understand anything? Wasn't she born in Madrid?" Daniel shrugged. "She moved to the United States when she was 8 or 9. She told me she stopped speaking Spanish after her mother died. She hasn't used it in years. She's probably forgotten all of it." He knew I had been born in Madrid. He knew my mother had been Spanish. What he had never done was ask what language I spoke before I moved to Boston. He had never wondered why I stepped onto the balcony whenever my grandfather called. He had never asked why certain songs, certain foods, and certain Spanish words could make me fall silent for the rest of the day. In college, Daniel and Rachel had signed up for an introductory Spanish class and invited me to join them. I had only said, "I don't want to take that class." After my mother's death, Spanish had become tangled up with hospital corridors, white roses at a funeral, and my grandfather crying at the airport as he held me too tightly to let go. I hadn't wanted to explain that to anyone. Daniel had not asked. He had taken my silence and turned it into the answer that was most convenient for him. It took me 5 years to understand that someone who truly cared about you would not stop at the easiest version of your story. Rachel took a sip of wine and continued in Spanish. "What about the night she had a fever? You didn't go home. You stayed at my apartment until morning. What if she finds out?" Daniel looked directly at me. I lowered my eyes and tore a small piece of bread in half. When he was satisfied I had not reacted, he gave a quiet laugh. "What would happen if she did find out?" "She can't leave me." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're that sure?" "Of course. She paid half the down payment on the condo, and she's helped with my mother's medical bills. She's already invested too much to walk away." He paused, then added, "Once I land the Soraya Renewables contract and get promoted to Director of Business Development, I'll deal with her properly." My fork touched the plate with a sharp click. They did not know Spanish was not a foreign language I had learned later in life. It was the first language I had ever spoken. They also did not know that Soraya Renewables, the company they were desperate to impress, had been founded by my mother's family. And the cross-border risk review for the project they believed would change their lives had been part of my job for the past 3 months. "Elena, where did you just go?" Daniel reached across the table and brushed his fingers against my cheek. His tone carried the familiar affection he always used when he wanted other people to believe he was taking care of me. "You're exhausted again, aren't you? I've told you that little consulting firm works you too hard. There's no reason to wear yourself out for a job with no future." I worked for Hale & West, a Boston-based cross-border risk consulting firm. It was not large, but it had spent years advising European companies on regulatory, supply chain, and market entry risks in the United States. Daniel had never bothered to understand what I did. He knew our office was not located in the most expensive tower downtown, and from that one detail, he had concluded that my career was small, ordinary, and unimportant. In the past, I would have explained it again. That night, I only asked, "What were you two talking about?" Daniel's hand paused. "Work. Soraya's client requirements." "Which requirements?" His expression tightened immediately. "Contract language. Technical terms. You wouldn't understand." "What's going on with you tonight? You've been in a mood since we sat down." Rachel quickly arranged her face into an apologetic smile. "This is my fault. Daniel and I have been preparing for a Spanish client for months, so we've gotten used to discussing the account in Spanish. I didn't mean to make you feel left out. Rachel had met me through Daniel 3 years earlier. She had just started working at Northbridge Energy Systems and claimed she barely knew anyone in Boston. She invited me to lunch, called me when she was anxious about work, sent flowers on my birthday, and comforted me after arguments with Daniel. Once, with tears in her eyes, she told me she had finally found a woman she could trust completely. I had believed her. She was never the friend who had grown up beside me. She was simply someone who had studied my life carefully enough to know what she wanted to take from it. Daniel saw her apologizing and immediately defended her. This isn't Rachel's fault. You know she's been my friend since we were kids, and she's the international accounts coordinator on the Soraya project. You can't treat her like a threat just because the two of you don't share the same interests. I didn't call her a threat. Then stop making dinner uncomfortable. His voice dropped. I spend all day worrying about sales targets, the mortgage, and my mother's treatment. Then I come home and have to manage your feelings. Elena, I'm exhausted. I had heard that speech too many times. Daniel never answered the question I asked. He only built a case for why I should not have asked it. The server brought 2 desserts. Daniel pushed the warm almond pudding toward Rachel and placed a cup of ice cream in front of me. Rachel's stomach has been sensitive lately. She shouldn't eat anything cold. You can have this. I had suffered from severe stomach pain after cold food for years. 3 months earlier, Daniel had reminded me not to touch an iced drink after I woke in the middle of the night doubled over in pain. But whenever Rachel appeared, every detail he remembered seemed to change owners. Rachel ate 2 spoonfuls of pudding, then pressed a hand to her stomach. Daniel's face filled with concern. Is this because of that iced coffee this afternoon? I told you not to drink it. Then he turned to me. You carry those disposable heating patches, don't you? Give her one. The patch in my purse was for me. I took it out and handed it across the table. Rachel's fingers brushed Daniel's when she accepted it. Neither of them moved away. They looked at each other for 1 second too long. That single glance held the easy, sticky intimacy of 2 people who had already crossed every line they pretended not to see. I excused myself and went to the restroom. The woman in the mirror looked pale, but her eyes were strangely calm. 3 months earlier, my temperature had reached 103 degrees. I had called a car to the emergency room by myself. I had checked in alone, paid alone, and spent hours under fluorescent lights with an 4 in my arm. Daniel posted online that he was so worried he could barely focus and that he would rush home the moment he finished work. Our friends praised him in the comments for being such a devoted boyfriend. He never came home. The next morning, there had been a dark red mark on his neck. He told me the metal edge of a file folder had scratched him at the office. I had believed that too. Now I knew he had not been working late. He had been in Rachel's apartment. When I returned to the table, Daniel was peeling shrimp for her. He removed every piece of shell and lined the shrimp neatly along the edge of her plate. In 5 years, he had never peeled one for me. Call a car after dinner, he said without looking up. Rachel isn't feeling well, so I'm taking her home first. I watched him. I'm not feeling well either. Daniel finally looked at me. His first reaction was not concern. It was irritation. You were fine 5 minutes ago. Rachel laughed softly in Spanish. She's probably competing with me for your attention. Daniel answered in the same language, ignore her. She gets like this whenever she feels insecure. I held his gaze. What did that mean? His face froze. What did what mean? The sentence you just said to Rachel. Rachel's fingers tightened around her wineglass. Daniel needed only 2 seconds to recover. I said the client feels insecure about the delivery schedule. You heard something and misunderstood it. Then translate the whole sentence. Elena, what exactly are you trying to do? His voice turned cold. You don't understand the language, and you don't understand our work, but you insist on turning everything into a conspiracy. Can you stop being so sensitive for once? The old version of me would have apologized immediately. I would have worried that I really was too suspicious. I would have been afraid of losing the man everyone else described as kind, patient, and dependable. Instead, I picked up my water and said, it was just a question. Forget it. I was not ready to expose them. I needed to know whether their private dishonesty had entered the project. I also needed to secure my documents, my money, and everything else they might try to use against me. When the check arrived, Daniel helped Rachel out of her chair and walked her toward the door. Once again, I paid for all three of us. Outside the restaurant, Rachel slid naturally into the passenger seat of Daniel's car. He closed the door for her, then spoke to me through the open window. "Don't turn tonight into some huge drama. Text me when you get home." Before the window rose, I heard Rachel ask in Spanish, "When are you finally going to break up with her?" Daniel started the engine. "Not until the Soraya contract is signed. The condo payment and my mother's medical bills are still heavy. If she leaves now, it will be a problem. Didn't she pay half the down payment? The title is in my name. Once I get promoted, I'll pay her back." Rachel laughed. "You really will?" "If she accepts the breakup quietly, sure. If she makes it ugly, I'll count that money as what she owed for living there all these years." The red taillights disappeared around the corner. I stood in the cold Boston wind and finally saw the true structure of our relationship. I had believed we were building a life together. Daniel had been calculating how much more of the cost I could carry. The condo down payment had been $90,000. I had paid $45,000. Because Daniel's credit profile had qualified us for a better loan, the mortgage and title had been placed temporarily in his name. Before I transferred the money, however, my father had insisted that we sign a cohabitation investment agreement witnessed by an attorney. The agreement clearly stated that my $45,000 represented half the down payment interest. If we separated, Daniel had to return the principal or settle my share based on the net equity after a sale. Daniel had laughed when we signed it. He said my father treated love like a business deal. Now I understood that the person who had always treated love like a transaction was Daniel. I did not return to the condo. Instead, I went to a furnished project apartment Hale and West, kept for long-term consultants. First, I emailed my attorney. I attached the cohabitation agreement, the bank transfer, and a written record of where and when I had heard Daniel discuss keeping my money. There was security footage outside the restaurant, but there was no recording of the conversation inside the car. I did not need to depend on anything I had overheard. The written agreement already existed, and that was enough. Then I opened my laptop and signed into Soraya Renewables' internal system. I had served as an external strategic advisor to the Soraya board since I was 22, focusing mainly on North American supply chain risk. Working at Hale and West was not an act of rebellion against my family, and I had never been pretending to be poor. I wanted experience outside the structure of a company that carried my mother's name. I wanted to know that my judgment could stand without anyone making room for me because I was Alejandro Soraya's granddaughter. Daniel knew my mother's family-owned businesses in Spain. He knew I occasionally advised them. What he had never asked was what the company was called. He had never listened when I explained cross-border compliance, market entry controls, or third-party risk. Because I used my father's last name, Bennett, rather than Soraya, he assumed my mother's family ran some fading regional company that no longer mattered. 3 months earlier, Soraya Renewables had begun searching for a new renewable energy component supplier in the northeastern United States. Hale and West was retained to participate in the risk review, and I had helped design the process from the beginning. When I saw Northbridge Energy Systems on the candidate list, I immediately disclosed that my long-term partner worked there. I withdrew from commercial scoring and the final vendor vote. I remained responsible only for cross-border compliance questions. The final decision would be made by a 5-person independent committee, 3 members from Soraya's headquarters and 2 from an external audit firm. I had not gained power because I wanted revenge on Daniel. I had done everything possible to make sure my private relationship could not influence the result. An email from my grandfather, Alejandro Soraya, waited in my inbox. "Elena, Northbridge's final presentation is tomorrow. Are you certain you still want to lead the compliance questions?" I replied yes. "I will discuss only the documents and evidence. I will continue to recuse myself from the final vote." His answer came a few minutes later. "That is exactly why I trust you." I did not go to sleep. I opened Northbridge's Spanish contract summary and compared it with the English cost schedule. The first inconsistency appeared within 20 minutes. In the English schedule, local market consulting fees represented 6% of the total bid. In the Spanish version, the same services had been split across logistics, translation, and market research, bringing the real amount close to 14%. The money flowed to a company called Riverside Market Consulting. Public registration records identified the owner as Rachel's cousin. No related party relationship had been disclosed. The second issue involved the structure of Northbridge's market entry proposal. It closely resembled a bid document another company had used in an industry competition 2 years earlier. The numbers had been updated, but the order of the sections, the analysis, and even several unusual phrases were nearly identical. One expired state tax incentive had been copied without correction. I marked the issues and sent them to the external audit team. At 1 a.m, the lead auditor replied, "We will perform an independent comparison. Tomorrow's meeting will be limited to preliminary questions. No conclusion has been reached." I closed the laptop. Daniel's betrayal was enough for me to end our relationship. But if he and Rachel lost the Soraya project, it would have to be because of their own professional decisions, not because I hated them. Over the next 2 days, Daniel barely came home. He still sent messages as if nothing had changed. "After the contract is signed, I'll finally have more time for you. Once I get promoted, we'll talk again about adding your name to the condo. Let's look at rings this weekend. You've always wanted to get married." Each promise felt like a rope thrown too late, trying to pull me back to the place where he had left me waiting. The night before Northbridge's final presentation, Rachel arrived at the condo with her laptop. She and Daniel planned to rehearse the Spanish portion of the presentation. I went back only to collect the last box of my belongings. They were sitting in the home office when I entered. Daniel stumbled over 2 technical terms while reading the warranty obligations. Rachel corrected one of them and mispronounced the other herself. Their Spanish was good enough for travel, small talk, and casual conversation. It was not good enough for contracts, finance, or technical risk. But their language skills were not the real problem. Their real problem was believing that speaking a few confident sentences in another language meant they understood international business. Daniel leaned back in his chair and complained in Spanish. "That old man in Madrid asks for too much. We've revised the proposal 6 times, and he still wants external auditors involved." Rachel laughed. "Traditional family companies are all like that. Tomorrow we only have to charm the advisors they send. They need us to enter the American market. They're not going to abandon the deal over a few formatting issues." Daniel lowered his voice. "Once the contract is signed, who is going to keep asking about the consulting fees?" I stood at the end of the hallway and listened. The old man in Madrid was my grandfather. He was the man who had called me every week across 6 time zones after my mother died. He was the man who never demanded that I inherit anything, yet quietly kept a place for me near the board until I was ready. As Rachel left, she hugged Daniel at the front door. This time, they did not stop at a lingering touch. Daniel lowered his head and kissed her. I did not run downstairs. I did not take a photograph. I did not confront them. I pulled my final suitcase into the elevator and left my key on the kitchen counter. At 9:30 the next morning, I arrived at Northbridge headquarters with Soraya's delegation and the external auditors. The conference room was filled with senior executives. Daniel stood beside the screen in a dark gray suit. Rachel held the presentation outline. When the visiting team entered, both of them put on the polished smiles they had practiced for weeks. Then I walked into the room. My badge read, Elena Bennett, External Strategic Risk Advisor, Soraya Renewables. Daniel's smile froze. The papers in Rachel's hands slipped onto the carpet. For several seconds, no one spoke. Northbridge's chief operating officer was the first to stand and shake my hand. "Ms. Bennett, welcome. We were informed that you would lead the compliance portion of today's review." "Thank you." I sat beside the external audit team, not in the chair reserved for the commercial scoring committee. Before we begin, I need to restate a conflict disclosure. Because I have a personal relationship with an employee of Northbridge, I will not participate in commercial scoring or the final supplier vote. I am here only to verify cross-border compliance matters. Any findings will be submitted to the independent committee. Several Northbridge executives visibly relaxed. Daniel turned even paler. He finally understood that this was not a private trial I had arranged after discovering his affair. The process had existed long before his betrayal came to light. I explained the meeting rules in English, then switched naturally into Spanish to review the document sequence with the Madrid legal team. I did not pause. I did not search for vocabulary. I did not sound like someone trying to remember a language from childhood. Rachel's lips parted. Daniel stared at me as if he were seeing the woman he had dated for 5 years for the first time. I did not look at either of them. Mr. Carter, Ms. Moore, I understand that the Spanish version of the proposal was prepared primarily by the two of you. Please present the contract summary in Spanish. Rachel walked to the screen. For the first 2 minutes, she stayed close enough to her memorized script to sound confident. When she reached the payment milestones and licensing terms, she began to hesitate. She translated payment following completion of milestone acceptance as full payment in advance upon signature. She then described a non-exclusive supplier arrangement as an exclusive distribution right for the northeastern United States. Soraya's legal director looked up immediately. Ms. Moore, are those Northbridge's actual proposed terms? Rachel's face lost its color. I'm sorry. That was a verbal mistake. Daniel stepped in. Technical terminology can create minor errors in live translation. It doesn't affect our understanding of the business arrangement. I opened the English summary. Payment structure and exclusive rights are core terms. Calling those errors insignificant is itself a risk. Daniel said nothing. I asked the auditor to display the two cost schedules side by side. The next issue concerns local consulting fees. In the English version, they represent 6% of the bid. In the Spanish version, related services are divided across several categories, bringing the total to approximately 14%. The funds are directed to Riverside Market Consulting. Northbridge's finance director frowned. We did not approve a 14% consulting allocation. Rachel spoke quickly. Riverside handles local channel development and Spanish-language market research. The costs were divided only so different departments could classify them properly. The auditor displayed the corporate registration record. Riverside was formed 5 months ago, has no full-time employees, and is registered to the residential address of Ms. Moore's cousin. Northbridge's conflict of interest form does not disclose that relationship. Rachel gripped the edge of her notes. Daniel looked at her. You recommended that company. Rachel turned on him instantly. You approved the final cost schedule. 2 people who had spent months claiming they had built the proposal together began separating themselves from responsibility in front of the entire room. I raised one hand. We are not assigning individual responsibility today. Northbridge will have 3 business days to provide the full contract file, approval emails, vendor due diligence records, and a written explanation of the relationship. The screen changed to a structural comparison of the market entry proposals. External analysis also found extensive overlap between Northbridge's submission and an industry bid used by another company 2 years ago. At this stage, we cannot determine whether this was licensed use, authorized template reuse, or unapproved copying. Northbridge will need to document the source and usage rights. Daniel stood. The file came from our team library. I didn't know the original source. Rachel quickly added, Daniel told me the company had permission to use it. Northbridge's chief operating officer's expression hardened. Both of you sit down. The company will conduct an internal investigation. I closed the file in front of me. Soraya will pause this stage of the evaluation pending Northbridge's review and the external audit. A pause is not a final decision. Daniel looked directly at me. Elena, can we talk privately? You can't let a problem between us stop a partnership between 2 companies. The room went silent. I met his eyes. Mr. Carter, every issue raised today is supported by documentation. I do not have a vote in the final decision. The person who brought our private relationship into this meeting was you. After the meeting, Daniel followed me into the hallway. Elena, wait. The audit team stopped. I told them I would meet them at the elevator. Daniel stood in front of me and lowered his voice. You've always spoken Spanish? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I answered in Spanish. Not until the Soraya contract is signed. The condo payment and my mother's medical bills are still heavy. If she leaves now, it will be a problem. They were his own words from the car. His face went white. I continued in Spanish. She can't leave me. She's already invested too much to walk away. Once I get promoted, I'll deal with her properly. Rachel stepped out of the conference room as I spoke the final sentence. She stopped moving. I switched back to English. Do either of you still want to know how much I understood? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Elena, I can explain. That night wasn't what you think. Was I also misunderstanding you when I saw you kiss him at the front door? She had no answer. Daniel focused on something else. What exactly is your relationship with Soraya? Alejandro Soraya is my grandfather. My mother was born into the family. I've served as an external advisor to the board since I was 22. You never told me your family owned the company. I told you my mother's last name was Soraya. I told you I advised my family's business. I held his gaze. You never listened long enough to ask what that meant. Daniel opened his mouth. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. I know I made a terrible mistake. But 5 years cannot all have been fake. The mortgage, my mother's treatment, the pressure at work, everything hit at once. I lost control for a while. Then he asked the question that mattered most to him. Can you have Soraya restart the evaluation? Once the contract is stable, we can work through our relationship slowly. He did not ask for forgiveness first. He asked for the project. I removed a document envelope from my bag. Our relationship is over as of today. This is formal notice ending our shared residence, along with a demand under the cohabitation investment agreement for the return of my $45,000. My belongings are gone. The key is on the kitchen counter. Daniel did not take the envelope. You're really throwing away 5 years because of Rachel? This is not because of her. I placed the envelope in his hand. This is because you betrayed me, used me, and still believe that if the contract survives, I should keep waiting for you. Rachel began to cry. You can't use your family's power to destroy our careers just because we hurt you. I recused myself from the final vote. I looked at her. If the investigation proves the documents were proper, the evaluation can continue. If it proves they were not, then your choices destroyed your careers, not mine. I turned toward the elevator. Daniel did not follow. For the first time, he understood that I had never been unable to leave him. I had simply been willing to stay. Northbridge did not fire anyone that day. After the meeting, Daniel and Rachel were removed from the Soraya account while the company preserved forensic copies of their laptops and work email. They were interviewed separately by compliance and human resources and were given the opportunity to submit written explanations. 3 days later, the external auditors completed the first phase of their review. Riverside Market Consulting was controlled by Rachel's cousin. Rachel had proposed hiring the company, claiming it had special access to Spanish-speaking markets. Daniel had approved dividing the fee across multiple cost categories and had checked no related party relationship on the conflict disclosure. The copied market entry proposal came from a private cloud folder left behind by one of Rachel's former colleagues. When Rachel sent the file to Daniel, she had warned him that the source might create a permissions issue. Daniel had replied, change it and submit it first. We'll fix the authorization after we win the contract. That message became the clearest piece of evidence. During the second week, Northbridge announced the final result of its internal investigation. Daniel and Rachel were terminated for failing to disclose a related party transaction, submitting inaccurate cost information, and using third-party material despite knowing the rights were uncertain. Northbridge canceled its agreement with Riverside and reserved the right to seek repayment. After reviewing the audit report, Soraya's independent committee voted unanimously to disqualify Northbridge from the current selection process. I did not participate in that vote. After the decision became public inside the companies, Daniel called me more than 20 times. I did not answer. He used another number to send a long message. Northbridge needed to protect the Soraya relationship, so they made Rachel and me the scapegoats. I admit I hurt you personally, but the work mistakes were not mine alone. Rachel was using me. The consulting firm and the old proposal both came from her. You are the person I always wanted to spend my life with. By the final line, I felt only tired. Daniel's version of love always came with one condition. I had to continue absorbing the consequences of his choices. Rachel sent me a voice message too. I never meant to steal your life. From the moment I met you, everyone thought you were calm, intelligent, and effortlessly secure. Daniel always described you as kind and stable. I just wanted to know whether, if he really saw me, he might choose me too. Then everything got out of control. I sent one reply. You did not steal my life. You only proved that a man who lies to his partner, hides conflicts of interest, and blames everyone else when he is caught is not worth keeping. You did not really want Daniel. You wanted to beat me. But a person is not a trophy. She never responded. A week later, Daniel and his mother were waiting outside Hale and West when I left work. Daniel looked thinner. He held a small ring box. His mother, Margaret, spoke first. I'm not here to excuse what he did. Then she immediately tried to excuse it. But a 5-year relationship should not end over one affair. Couples survive worse things than this. I stopped several feet away. The affair is not the only reason it ended. Daniel treated me like part of the mortgage payment and part of the medical budget. He planned to decide what to do with me after he got promoted. Margaret's face tightened. He was under enormous pressure. He would never really keep your down payment. Then why was my name never added to the title? Because the loan and title were safer in his name at first. Safer for whom? She hesitated. You weren't married. We were worried that if you left him, Daniel might lose the condo. At last, she had said the truth clearly. From the beginning, they had protected themselves against the possibility that I might leave, while feeling completely entitled to accept half the down payment from me. Daniel interrupted her. Mom, stop. He stepped closer and opened the ring box. Elena, I know this looks ridiculous now. But I did buy the ring. I can sell the condo, repay every dollar, and find another job. If you are willing, we can start again. I looked at the ring. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to see Daniel hold one out to me. Now that it was finally there, I felt neither excitement nor grief. You are not here because losing me broke your heart, I said. You are here because you lost your job, the contract, and possibly the condo. That is when you suddenly remembered how important I was. That's not true. Then answer one question. I looked straight at him. If I were really the ordinary consultant you believed I was, if I did not speak Spanish and had no connection to Soraya, would you be standing here today? Yes, he said immediately. The answer came too quickly and meant too little. I asked another question. If Northbridge had never uncovered the files, if you had been promoted, and if Rachel still wanted to be with you, would you have told me the truth on your own? Daniel said nothing. That silence was more honest than every apology he had offered. I handed him my attorney's card. The down payment will be handled through counsel. Do not come to my workplace again. Margaret started to speak, but Daniel stopped her. I walked into the building without looking back. The property dispute did not resolve itself with one dramatic letter. Daniel's attorney initially argued that I had received years of housing use and that part of my contribution should be offset against that benefit. My attorney relied on the written investment agreement and payment records, which clearly treated the $45,000 as a joint investment, not rent and not a gift. After 2 rounds of negotiation, Daniel agreed that when the condo was sold, my principal would be repaid first from the net equity. If the sale did not cover the full amount, he would pay the difference over 12 months. When the settlement was signed, I did not feel victorious. I felt relieved that I had finally stopped paying for a relationship that no longer existed. At the same time, Rachel posted a vague essay online. She did not mention Riverside, the related party relationship, or the unlicensed proposal. She wrote only that a person with family influence had punished ordinary employees after a private romantic dispute. For a few hours, people sympathized with her. Some comments said that wealthy people should not hide their identities and then blame others for failing to understand them. Others said corporate decisions should never be mixed with personal revenge. I did not argue with strangers online. After legal review, Soraya and Northbridge released a short joint compliance statement. It did not mention anyone's affair. It did not expose unnecessary private details. It confirmed only that the supplier disqualification had been decided by an independent 5-person committee, that I had recused myself from the final vote because of a personal relationship, and that the investigation had identified an undisclosed related party transaction, inconsistent cost information, and missing authorization for third-party materials. The external audit firm also confirmed that the document review had begun before the final meeting and that the evidence did not depend on private allegations. Public opinion changed quickly. The most liked response said if she wanted to use family power for revenge, she would not have voluntarily removed herself from the vote. Rachel deleted her post. Daniel made no public statement. Their final attempt to describe their own decisions as something I had done to them failed too. Soraya reopened the supplier process. To remove even the appearance of bias, I stayed out of the new commercial scoring and provided every candidate with the same compliance questionnaire. A small engineering company in Rhode Island eventually won the contract. Its presentation was not the most polished. No one on its sales team tried to impress our headquarters with rehearsed Spanish. The founder was a woman in her 50s who walked us through the factory carrying a thick binder of test data. She explained product life, component sources, pricing volatility, and failure rates line by line. "We are not very good at telling a beautiful story," she said. "But every number in our contract can be verified." That was when I truly understood something my grandfather had told me for years. Language is only the bridge. Integrity is what keeps the bridge standing. My grandfather flew from Madrid to Boston for the signing. When he saw me backstage, he held me for a long time. "Are you finally ready to stand where people can see you?" he asked. For years, I had believed that accepting anything connected to my family meant surrendering my independence. I used my father's last name. I avoided public attention around Soraya. I reduced my own history to a few vague sentences so no one could accuse me of depending on it. I had also made myself smaller in love, believing that if I appeared ordinary enough, Daniel would never feel threatened by me. But independence is not refusing everyone who loves you. It is not pretending you have no ability, no history, and no support. It is knowing what you have and being accountable for how you use it. After the contract signing, Soraya's board invited me to become head of North American strategy and risk. I did not accept immediately. I first confirmed that the role would report to an independent audit committee. I confirmed that supplier decisions would remain shared across multiple people and that I could continue bringing experience from outside the family structure. 1 week later, I accepted. Not because I wanted to prove I was more successful than Daniel. I accepted because I was finally finished running from work I genuinely wanted to do. 2 months later, Daniel sold the condo. After the remaining mortgage, taxes, and transaction costs, there was not much equity left. Under our agreement, most of my down payment was returned first. Daniel signed a payment schedule for the remaining balance. Margaret's ongoing treatment was covered through insurance and family savings. I asked my attorney to confirm that no previous bill I had paid was being claimed against me again. Beyond that, I provided no additional help. It was the last responsibility from that relationship that I ever carried. 6 months later, the new supplier's first shipment passed every test. The actual cost was 7% lower than Northbridge's proposal, and delivery was 18 days faster. Someone later told me Daniel had joined a small sales company. Rachel moved to Chicago. Their relationship ended quickly, and they were blaming each other over Riverside's repayment claims. I did not follow the details. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I returned to Madrid with my grandfather. A light wind moved through the cemetery, and white daisies grew beside the stone. I knelt and spoke to my mother in Spanish. I told her I was no longer afraid to use the language she had given me. I told her I would no longer treat everything connected to her as a wound that had to remain hidden. My grandfather waited a short distance away. As we left, he asked, "Will you ever pretend not to understand again just to make someone comfortable?" I shook my head. No. A person who truly loves you does not need you to act less intelligent. They do not feel threatened by your competence. They do not mistake your silence for stupidity or your generosity for obligation. At my first industry dinner after returning to Boston, a client heard me speaking with the Madrid team and asked, "How is your Spanish so natural?" I smiled. Because it is my first language. For a moment, I remembered Daniel at the restaurant. Don't worry. Elena can't understand us. The truth was that I had understood every word. I had simply loved him enough to keep translating contempt into humor, indifference into stress, and betrayal into misunderstanding. Eventually, I learned that some sentences only need to be understood once. After that, there is nothing left to argue about. You only have to turn around and leave.